Salutations. Plato's dialogues are explorations of different topics, which take a dialectic form and often end ambiguously, leaving questions unanswered and revealing the profound ignorance of human beings regarding the real nature of the world.
Enter the dumb hole.
This leaves a lot of speculation and interpretation to be done by later generations of commentators, who systematically unfold the implications of each logical conclusion. Among the dialogues, there is none so obscure and esoteric as the Parmenides.
Who the fuck is D's?
Taken as a whole, the set of hypotheses explored by the titular speaker provides a demonstration that the world of motion and generation that we observe around us is impossible if forms do not exist. But each hypothesis on its own also constitutes a self-contained theorem that is revealed if we take the first hypothesis to be about the first principle, which we clearly ought to since Parmenides is discussing the one, itself by itself. So what does Parmenides conclude about the principal monad? It cannot then be, even to the extent of being one, for then it would be a thing that is and participates in being, but it seems that the one neither is one nor exists at all if one is to believe such an argument as this. Oh, we lost, lads. The one isn't real. It's all over. But if that's the case, why did all the Platonists who read the Parmenides keep on talking about the one? Obviously there is more to this conclusion, so let's start by talking about being. Being, toon, or ontas in Greek, refers to the foundational intelligible quality on which intelligibility is based. It is related to the term ousia, or individual essence, which refers to what a specific thing really is as distinct from its various properties, or accidents, though essence applies only to particulars and is dependent on being. Different beings can interact with and influence one another because of their shared being, whereas things which don't participate in being cannot. The most important example of such stratification is to be found on the plane of intellect. Its preliminary version can already be seen in Plotinus, who occasionally reflects on the fact that within intellect there exists a certain duality. Intellect is defined by its thinking, but thinking implies the existence of something thought as different from the one who thinks. In a number of passages, Plotinus speaks of these two aspects as of intellect, the contemplating subject, and being, the contemplated object. Together with an intermediary principle termed life, being and intellect form the noetic triad. In most circumstances, the noetic triad is collectively called the nous, or intellect, because the distinction between these three special aspects of intellect is more often than not irrelevant. For our current purposes, however, it is important. Inside the triad, being logically comes before intellect. If intellect came first, it would not have being, and also it would not contemplate anything, and thus wouldn't be intellect. The intellect contains many specific beings, the forms, which have both being and various formal characteristics. Before these is the one being, whose only characteristics are its being and its unity. But unity is not a being, because everything has some kind of unity, as we learned from Proclus's first proposition, while not everything shares the same being. Then the one will have being, but its being will not be the same with the one, for if the same, it would not be the being of the one, nor would the one have participated in being, for the proposition that the one is would have been identical with the proposition that one is one.
Now you've confused me almost immediately, and you promised me you weren't going to do that.
So the one as the principle of unity is something other than the one being, and in fact has no being, only unity. We can also clearly tell that the simply one is above the one being. With a short investigation, it is impossible for there to be a being that isn't one, that is, an existence without a specific thing that exists, but it is possible for there to be a one that isn't a being, that is, an individual thing that doesn't exist. There are plenty of things that don't exist, but there are no existences that aren't individual beings. This means that unity precedes being. For let it be said, if you please, and we will first of all allow it, that the conclusions of this second hypothesis of the Parmenides are about true being. But as this is a multitude, and not only one itself like the one prior to beings, for being is that which is passive to the one, as the Elean guest in the Sophist informs us, and as it is universally acknowledged even by our opponents. The simply one is also the proper place of the henadic manifold. If the henads were beings, they would not be self-perfect unities, but would be beings participating in specific unity. But where would the specific unity of each being come from? It would have to come from a unical manifold above being, so we would need to propose another set of henads in order to account for our henadic beings.
You don't get to bring friends.
In this case, there is no reason to propose henadic beings, so we must place the henads prior to being. The first hypothesis they declare to be concerned with God and the gods, for the discussion is not only about the one, but about all the divine henads. Now let's look at
you fool! Don't you see that if this one is not a being, then it can't affect other beings and can't have emanated everything like you say? You've contradicted yourself. Your whole system is nonsense. On the contrary, dear viewer, the power of the simply one over everything else can be easily deduced from the definition of being we explored earlier. Beings can interact with other beings because they share in being as a whole. It is our common participation in being that gives us our essences. If we apply this same rule to unity, we see that it is common participation in unity that gives us our individuality. We are connected to the one as individuals, participating in the serai which descend into being from the simply one. The one being receives its unity from the simply one, and emerges out of this unity. Before this, there is no distinction between being and non-being, because such a distinction is a function of unity. Oh, well, how about this? You can't jump straight from the simply one to being, because being and non-being are a duality. What do you say to that then? You are correct, this is a real problem, one that is recognised within the Parmenides itself. If being and the one be two different things, it is not because the one is one that it is other than being, nor because being is being that it is other than the one, but they differ from one another in virtue of otherness and difference. This otherness or inequality is the function of what is called the indefinite dyad. According to the pre-Socratic philosopher Anaximander, the indefinite, unlimited, or apeiron is the source of opposites like heat and cold, and the various phenomena of the world are formed out of these opposites acting on one another. The Pythagorean Philolaus posited that all beings contain the definite and the indefinite, or limit and the unlimited.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Plato in the Philebus agrees with this, and further states that being itself is predicated on these two principles. Limit and the unlimited evidently emerge with the dyad, or two, because inequality can only exist between at least two polarized things. So the indefinite dyad stands between the simply one and being, as all beings are subject to the dyad. For indeed, the one first principle is prior to the two, and this is the simply one, which Iamblichus postulates in between the two first principles and the absolutely ineffable. These two principles may be termed limit and the unlimited, or if one wishes, one and many, the one here to be taken as opposed to many, not the one which is prior to both these and has nothing opposed to it. Thus we end up with this scheme, the simply one, the indefinite dyad, and the one being that begins the noetic triad.
This is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them.
What's that you say? It's not complicated enough. Well, you're in luck because we're not finished yet. For neither is being the same with the one, but participates of the one, nor in reality is that which is the first the one, for, as has been frequently said, it is better than the one. Oh no! Proclus has gone off the rails, the madman! He's saying that the one isn't the first. Somebody stop him! No, let's calm down a minute. Why did we ever say that the first principle is the one to begin with? Well, there are two reasons. The first being that we can't think of anything that doesn't participate in unity. The other reason is simplicity. We are aiming to reduce our unjustified assumptions as far as possible, to create a system that derives the world as we know it from the simplest possible starting point without unnecessarily introducing anything extra. What can be simpler than the unity that transcends being?
That sounds simple enough.
If we continue down the path to simplicity, we are led to that which is so simple as to not even be one, something so simple that even the word something is inappropriate. Therefore no name or description or knowledge or sensation or opinion applies to it. One may be reminded here of the opening lines of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. This subject is covered extensively by Damascius in his book of Problems and Solutions Concerning First Principles, in which he provides many explanations with far greater depth and scope than can be summarised here.
Sometimes my genius is... it's almost frightening.
Damascius refers to this one behind the one only as the ineffable, informing us that by necessity anything that could possibly be said about the ineffable is definitively wrong. It is not one, it is not many, it is not real, it is not unreal, it does not produce, nor is it sterile.
It's a what? What is it?
All of these concepts or conditions only apply to things after the one, as they imply either unity, duality, or multiplicity to be intelligible. But if the one is the cause of all things and the container of all things, in what manner can we ascend beyond it? The danger is that we shall simply be stepping into the void and aspiring to that which is nothing at all, for that which is not even one is nothing in the strictest sense. This puzzle is not difficult to resolve, since even earlier it was remarked that non-existence relates to what is inferior, whereas this is to be posited with respect to the superior. These denials are not made in the same way in both cases, since in the case of what is inferior, what is denied of it is superior, while in the case of what is superior, what is denied of it is inferior, if we may so put it. For example, we utter negatives both in the case of matter and in the case of the one, but this non-being is used in two distinct senses. This is like the difference between a peasant and a king. Neither the peasant nor the king is a duke, but one of them is less than a duke, while the other is above and beyond a duke. Nobody sane would say that a king is a type of peasant. The one and the henads are participated in by being. They possess paternal relationships with those things that are generated by them. They are compounded by these relationships and become part of something complex, the totality of all things. The ineffable has no such relationships. It is prior to the simply one in an ineffable way that is fundamentally different from participation or emanation. So the ineffable is not part of the totality of all things as the one after it is. We can deduce the ineffable through negative reasoning, but nothing can be stated of it. Even the fact that it is ineffable is not a property it has in itself, but is a description of our own inability to grasp it. If we are in search of the function of this entity, this is the most useful and necessary of all functions, namely, that from that realm everything proceeds as from an inner shrine, but in an ineffable and secret manner. For it does not produce the many as does the one, nor the distinct as does the unified, but rather it is as ineffable that it produces all things in a like way. Thus we finally end up with this scheme as the basic starting point for existence. This account of the ineffable has echoes in the writings of Christian mystics such as Meister Eckhart, who refer to God as nothing, no thing, transcending beyond existence itself, and impossible to grasp in positive terms. It also mirrors the emptiness beyond all duality that Buddhists strive to attain, revealing a convergence on common truth, if not a primordial tradition. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.